afternoon, everybody. Wow, you guys are just like a sea of blackness. Okay, this is very bright lights up here. Cool, so I'm super excited to be here with all of you today, talking about how math works in JavaScript. And specifically, we're gonna talk about addition. So when I was writing this talk, I did what any programmer would do, and I Googled JavaScript addition. And literally the third hit was this rather poignant Stack Overflow post, where someone is saying addition is not working in JavaScript. I feel them. So here's this poor person, they're trying to learn JavaScript, and they're doing what they think should be a fairly straightforward thing, right? They're just trying to add two numbers together, and they're getting an unexpected result. 2 plus 2 equals 22, 5 plus 7 equals 57, and they're especially confused because division, multiplication, and subtraction are somehow all working just fine, but addition is not. All right. And I really felt for this person because this is legit, right? Like here they are trying to do some simple addition, and JavaScript is violating every expectation they have about how math works. And it's not just beginners who feel this way. This is a slide from a lightning talk Gary Bernhardt gave a few years ago called What, which if you haven't seen, I highly recommend. And it's basically just 4 minutes of him pointing out a bunch of ridiculous things in JavaScript and Ruby that seemingly make no sense, including this rather bizarre math. So I watched this talk, and I felt kind of like, GIF upcoming, I felt kind of like this. Fortunately, the talk does not end here, because once I got over my complete croglement, I decided, you know what, somewhere buried inside this language, there's a reason that JavaScript acts this way. So we're going to go on a little adventure with our friend Donald Duck here, and we're going to figure this out. So hi, I'm Mira. I live in Chicago, that's my Twitter handle in the middle there, and I work at a consultancy called TableXI. So before we go too deep into the internals of how JavaScript handles math, we probably want to be clear on what the things are that we're doing math with. So we're just going to go through a quick overview of the basics just to make sure we're all on the same page. So we're going to learn about object types. There's a few different kinds. So JavaScript has 6 primitive types, which are basically the building blocks of the language, and we're just going to breeze through them. So the first primitive type is a Boolean, and a Boolean can be only one of 2 things, which is true or false. We also have numbers. In JavaScript, we don't distinguish between integers and floats, and we also have a few special things. So there's plus and minus infinity, which we're not going to worry about for the purposes of this talk, and this thing called not a number, which is what NaN stands for. Fun fact. If you call type of on not a number, you get number. Hilarious. Thanks, JavaScript. So we also have strings, which is pretty much anything you put quotes. And of course, there are objects which can contain both data and behavior. So objects can have a lot of stuff in them like this one, or they can be empty objects, which we would represent by a pair of curly brackets. Null represents nothing, which is different from undefined, which is what you get when you've declared a variable in your scope, but you've never actually set a value. JavaScript also has a bunch of different types of data structures, but for the purposes of this talk, we only need to worry about one, which is array. And array you can think about as a collection, and it can be a collection of all one type of thing, like this array of integers up here, or it can be like the second array, where it's a bunch of different things. So great, let's do some math. So we've got a few examples here. This is the participation section of the talk. Get excited. So what do you guys think? Just shout it out. Y'all, sorry, I say you guys as a tick and it's terrible and I'm trying to fix it. What do you all think the JavaScript engine is going to give us when we give it 2 plus 2? Just shout it out. 4. Oh my gosh. All right. Winning. How about apples plus bananas? Apples, bananas, yes. How about string 2 plus string 2? 22. All right, fantastic. So as we can see from that last slide, plus actually means 2 different things. So the first one is number addition, which hopefully we're all familiar with. And this other one is string concatenation, which if anyone is not familiar, is basically just taking 2 or more smaller strings and squishing them together to make one bigger string. So all right, we're feeling pretty good. So let's try something a little more interesting. What happens if we add numbers and strings to each other? All right, second participation section. What do we think is going to happen when we add string to and number to? 22. Okay, 22. How about number 2 plus string 2? Okay, I heard some 22s, I heard some 4s. Still 22. Okay. How about 2 plus apples? 5. 5. It's not 5. Sorry. So this is interesting. So basically what's happening here is no matter what order we put them in, anytime we're adding numbers and strings, JavaScript is going to turn something that's not already a string into a string, and then do string concatenation. So it doesn't matter that in the first example we're calling a function on a string, and in the second example we're calling a function on a number. Either way, it behaves the same way. And the way that it's doing this is through something called coercion. So coercion is implicitly converting a value from one type to another. We never actually told JavaScript that we wanted it to convert anything to a string. It basically just looked at the expression we gave it and said, I think you're trying to do a string thing. It looks like you're wanting a string. And so it gave us one, which is very, very magical and not confusing at all. So at this point, I think we've got enough data to come up with kind of a working model of how addition works in JavaScript. So for the expression a plus b, if either a or b is a string, we're doing string concatenation with coercion if necessary. And otherwise, if both a and b are not strings, we're doing number addition. So at this point, I'm feeling kind of like this. We've got this great model. We're totally rocking and rolling here. So let's try something a little more interesting. Okay, so what if I want to add some other things? What would you expect to happen, or what might you want to happen, maybe is a better question, when you're trying to add these 2 arrays up here in the first example?
Concatenation. Concatenation of alternate numbers.
Okay, I'm hearing the word concatenation. That is what happens. It doesn't look very nice. I'm not a fan of it personally, but that's what JavaScript does. What do we think might happen when we try to add true plus true? Okay, I heard a lot of different things. It is 2. How about undefined and null? Okay, somebody said undefined null. That would be fun. 0. Not a number. Okay. How about null plus null?
5.
Still not 5. It's 0. Yeah. How about empty array plus empty object?
0.
Okay, I heard some 0. I heard some undeterminable things. It is the string representation of an object. How about empty object plus empty array? 0. What? All right. So, at this point I'm feeling a little more like this. Like, what is happening? It's getting a little scary here. But it's okay. We're going to hit the books, and we're going to do some math, and we're going to figure out what the heck is going on. So the authoritative source for what the heck is going on with JavaScript is the ECMAScript specification, which is a very long document put out by the people who write the language about how JavaScript is supposed to behave. So let's see what the ECMAScript specs tell us about the addition operator. This is a lot of text. You don't have to read all of this because I have helpfully boiled it down to the definition we're going to see on the next 2 slides. So here we are now with a slightly modified version of our model. For the expression a plus b, if either a or b is a string, or its primitive default value is a string, which is something we're going to learn about soon, we're going to do string concatenation, and we're going to do coercion if necessary. Otherwise, if both a or b are not strings, we're going to do number addition, and again, if we need to do coercion, we're going to do it. So this is great. So now that we have our model, let's go back to our examples from before and figure out how we get these results. So I don't know about all y'all, none of these operands on the left really look like strings to me, so I'm going to assume we're trying to do number addition. So let's give that a shot. Here we have the table that EmpireJS provides for us on how to convert these things to numbers. So undefined goes to not a number, null goes to +0. In case you were wondering, yes, there is a -0. Why is there a -0? Reasons. For booleans, we will get 1 if the value is true, 0 if it's false, which makes a lot of sense if you think about bits. Numbers are just whatever they already are. Strings we're never going to have to worry about, and objects are a little more complicated, but I feel like we've already learned some useful stuff. Oops, sorry about that. So let's take our new knowledge and do some math. So already, just from that table, we've got 3 of our 6 problem children figured out. So true plus true goes to 1 plus 1, which gives us 2. Undefined and null. Undefined goes to not a number. Null goes to 0. Not a number plus 0 is still not a number. Sorry. It's also not 5. Null plus null goes to 0 plus 0, which is going to give us 0. But we've still got our other 3 examples. So let's go back to the first part of our definition. So before I condense this definition, literally the first 6 or 7 steps are how to determine if A or B is a string or should be treated like a string. And it turns out the first thing we need to do is call toPrimitive on our operands. So here's toPrimitive. And unsurprisingly, if we look at this table, we see that anything that is already one of the primitive types does not change. So booleans, undefined, nulls, numbers, none of those should ever be treated as strings. Strings are being treated as strings already, obviously, and so basically all we have left now is an object. And in order to figure out how to handle that, we're going to call an internal method called default value. So here's the definition of default value. And basically what this does is it takes an object and it tries to turn it into either a number or a string. And for the way it's being called with addition, it's going to try and turn it into a string first. So almost any kind of objects, including arrays, is going to be treated as a string. So if we go back to our examples, here we've got these 2 arrays. We're going to coerce them to strings. And then now we have an expression that we know how to handle. We're just going to do string concatenation, and we get this result. Again, now we have an empty array plus an empty object. Empty array goes to empty string. Empty object goes to this object looking thing. And again, we know how to do string concatenation, and here's our result. So this is really great. I'm feeling really good about this. But we've still got this one little mysterious example down at the bottom. And for some reason, this example seems to not be following any of our rules. So what's going on here? And it turns out there's something else I didn't tell you. Something I feel like JavaScript doesn't really tell you. It's not super obvious, at least not to me. But it turns out that the plus sign, just by itself, casts anything to a number. So you can prefix literally anything with a plus sign, and it will cast that thing to a number. So at this point, I'm feeling kind of like this. Like, what is reality? What is even happening? I don't know. But here now, if we go back to our example, empty object plus empty array, I'm still not quite seeing how we get to 0. And yes, it turns out there is one more gotcha, which is these curly braces. So this whole talk, I've been referring to this as an empty object because that's what I think this is. That's certainly what I intended it to be, but actually this notation is ambiguous. These curly brackets can also represent an empty block. And so a block, as we know, is just a group of code, and an empty block is just a group of code that does nothing. So what happens when the JavaScript engine sees this code is it says, well, here's a group of code that does nothing, and then you want me to cast this empty array to an integer or to a number. And so it does that, and we get 0. Yay? So yeah, hooray, we figured it out. This is fantastic. But what about our poor friend on Stack Overflow? So have we solved their problem? Why is addition so different? And if we go back to the ECMAScript spec again, this time for multiplication and division, and subtraction, you're just going to have to trust me, follows the same pattern. We'll see that unlike with addition, there is no if-else here. So no matter what your input looks like, if you're doing multiplication or division or subtraction or even modulo, you're always going to coerce things first to a number and then do whatever the operator directs you to do. So you may be wondering, great, it's delightful that I know more about how JavaScript addition works now, but what happens next time I'm feeling like this, or maybe like this, or maybe even like this, and there are things you can do. So step one, experiment. Play around in a REPL, try things out in console, do all the weirdest things you can think of to gather data about how whatever you're trying to learn about works. Step two is guess. In science, we might call this a hypothesis. So in this talk, that was the very first model that we came up with. Step three, iterate and research. Try and break your model. If you're lucky enough to have documentation available, read that. And then go ahead and refine your model from there. Step four, hopefully now you understand. And then you too can have an awesome dance party like Donald Duck. So that's pretty much all I've got. But before I go, I want to say thanks to all these lovely people who helped this talk come to be, as well as my company, TableXI. And if you'd like to learn more about anything I covered in my talk, you can check out these references. The You Don't Know JS series is fantastic. I really recommend it. The ES5 specs are online, and so is Mathmagic Lab, so check it out. It's on YouTube. Awesome. Thanks so much.